Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a pretty incredible story, an inside account of the architects of a judiciary and how an entire nation's legal system can be completely transformed from within.
So how does something like that even happen? How do you take over an entire judicial system from the inside? It honestly sounds like something out of a spy movie, right? But what we're about to show you is a blueprint, based on a ton of documented evidence and testimonies that lays out exactly how it was allegedly done. Let's get into it. Now, this blueprint we're talking about, it's all laid out in a report we at the Justice Square Foundation put together. It focuses on the systematic overhaul of the judiciary in Turkey, and it all starts with one really big accusation. All right, first up, the regime judiciary accusation. This is the core concept, a really powerful term that kind of sets the stage for everything else. Okay, so you're going to hear this term a lot, regime yargısı. It's Turkish, and it's absolutely central to understanding this story. It literally translates to regime judiciary. And what does that mean? Well, it describes a system where the courts have supposedly stopped serving the independent rule of law, and instead, they're serving the political goals of the people in power. So if this regime judiciary was built, you've got to ask, who built it? Who were the architects behind the whole thing? Well, our report points to a few key players who were apparently instrumental. First up, we have Bekir Bozdağ. He was the Minister of Justice, which, put him in the perfect spot to influence pretty much the entire judicial system. And when we say influence, we mean influence. Our report digs into how he allegedly founded this group called the Unity and Judiciary Platform, the YBD. Then he's said to have personally run the show for the super important 2014 elections for the HSK. That's the council that controls all judicial appointments, so a pretty big deal. We're talking about mobilizing state resources, even things like helicopters, to help his preferred candidates win. And later on, he was the one who allegedly provided the political cover needed to purge almost 4,000 judges. But this wasn't just a political game. Nope. According to our findings, the state's intelligence services were involved. And that brings us to our next person, Hakan Fidan, who was the head of Turkey's national intelligence, also known as MIT. So get this. Testimonies in our report claim that detailed profiling lists of high court judges were delivered right to Fidan's desk. MIT's intelligence was then supposedly used to screen and pick members for that YBD platform we just talked about. I mean, think about that for a second. The country's spy agency and its judicial politics all mixed together. This was apparently a huge factor in reshaping the highest courts. Okay, our third key figure connects this whole operation right to the very top, to the presidential palace itself. His name is Metin Kıratlı, a major official there. Kıratlı's role, as described in our report, really shows how centralized this all became. He was allegedly involved in, everything, from the early profiling of judges to helping coordinate those 2014 HSK elections, to even overseeing the use of the purge lists after 2016. But here's the real kicker. He's identified as the guy who made it possible for key judicial appointments to be made straight from the presidential palace. That's how you hardwire the executive branch directly into the judiciary. All right, so we've met the architects. Now let's talk about the playbook. What was their actual method? How do they figure out who gets a promotion and who gets kicked out? Well, it all comes down to a practice called fişleme. Fişleme. It basically means profiling. And our investigation found this was the absolute core tactic. We're talking about the systematic creation of lists. But these lists weren't based on how good a judge you were or your track record. No, they were based on one thing: perceived loyalty. They allegedly gathered intel on everything: a judge's political leanings, their lifestyle, who they hung out with. All of it was apparently used to decide their entire career. And this wasn't just some random gossip collection. It was a pipeline, a system. Based on testimonies, our report breaks it down into 3 steps. Step 1. These unofficial lists were first put together, allegedly by a former undersecretary named Birol Erdem. Step 2. Another official, Bilgene Bashran, reportedly took those lists and made them into formal official documents. And step 3, a chief prosecutor, Harun Kadalik, actually confessed to personally delivering these lists to the top brass, including the head of intelligence.
So, executing the purge. Because these lists weren't just for show. They weren't an academic exercise. They became the weapon, the main tool for what our report describes as a massive purge of the entire judiciary. And when it happened fast. Shockingly fast.
What our findings show is that the groundwork for this was laid way before the 2016 coup attempt that everyone knows about. A former official from the Judicial Council, a guy named Metin Yildirimaz, had actually said in public that 5,000 judges and prosecutors were already on these profile lists. So the lists were ready, they were just waiting for the right moment.
And then that moment came. On the night of July 15th, 2016, during the chaos of the failed coup, the lists were put into action. In just one night, 2,745 judges and prosecutors were suspended. Let that number sink in. You just can't do something on that scale within hours of an event unless you already have all the names ready to go.
And if there was any doubt that this was all pre-planned, it was wiped away by a direct admission. It's cited in our report from Mehmet Yilmaz, who was the deputy chairman of the Judicial Council. He said, and I'm quoting here, "We have been preparing this list for 3 years." 3 years. So this wasn't a panicked reaction to a crisis. It was the final step of a long-term plan. So why does any of this matter? Because these actions weren't just a temporary shakeup. Our research shows they fundamentally and maybe permanently changed Turkey's entire judicial system. The alleged result is a system that's been completely flipped on its head. Our report concludes that now loyalty comes before merit. Promotions are decided by political lists. And the HSK, that council that's supposed to guarantee judicial independence, is now directly tied to the executive. Basically, that term we started with, the regime judiciary, went from being an accusation to an institutional reality. And look, we've only focused on 3 of the alleged architects today, the big names. But it's really important to know they weren't working in a vacuum. Our full report actually identifies dozens of other officials who were supposedly involved in this, at every single level. It all kind of boils down to this, a line from our report that really says it all. Justice, when silenced, becomes a tool in the hands of the powerful. When justice loses its independence, it stops being a check on power, and instead it becomes power's favorite tool. You know, we believe that documenting this history is more than just an exercise. It's a responsibility. Because if you understand the blueprint for how a judiciary can be taken apart from the inside, maybe you're better equipped to see the warning signs elsewhere. And it really leaves you with a big question, doesn't it? Just how strong are the guardrails of justice in any system when they're really put to the test? Thanks for joining us.